Hey everyone, we've been taking a look at the Dutch-speaking world, focusing on their struggles for independence, and then their rise to economic prosperity, and then that leading to cultural developments. And I divided up the discussion between what's happening in Flanders and what's happening in Holland. This lecture, I want to just take a look at some major ideas that is happening in Holland. As the art is going to be distinctly different in terms of style and themes about what's happening in the south with Flanders, which is predominantly Catholic. I wanted to just establish some major ideas of Calvinism, and I wanted us to be able to think about how these ideas are going to shape the way that artists perceive their world. And I think there's some key components to them. And maybe we can even think about how these ideas might still be kind of residually part of the United States' culture, right? Because the Puritans come in, or Calvinists, they have these ideas, and maybe we maintain some of them to this day. Calvin argued, number one, for predestination. That means that God elects who will be saved, right? And I think that kind of rubs us in the church the wrong way because we believe in agency. But what he argues is that agency robs God of his glory, right? And so he believes that God knows all, can control all, and so humanity doesn't necessarily have that kind of bigger role within that, right? He argues for the total depravity of humanity. Humanity is wholly corrupt due to the fall and need God's grace to be saved. And there's no way that we can be saved without God's grace. And so, again, it's just a way to see humanity, that humanity, due to the fall, is inherently corrupt. And there's no way to get rid of that sin or that stain other than Christ, right? Other than, salvation. I think, think about the parts of this theology we agree with and parts of the theology that we disagree with. I think that there's some elements there that I think that we would maybe agree with. Maybe we don't necessarily go as far as them. I mean, it's kind of, suggesting that we're wholly corrupt. Maybe that's not such, I don't think we go that far. But we do have scriptures that suggest that the natural man is an enemy to God. And so there are parts of this that we might agree with. Number three, there's the unconditional election. So no matter, no amount of good works can save a human being or save someone. So it doesn't matter how hard you're working towards God, unless God has elected you to be saved, good luck. It's not going to do you any good. So then the follow-up question generally to this is, how do you know if you've been saved, right? How do you know if God has elected you to be saved? And here's where it gets a little bit tricky. You know that you've been saved by the blessings that you have. So the more blessings that you have, the more ability or more likelihood that God has elected you to be saved. Well, how do you know if you have a lot of blessings? Well, you have a lot of blessings based on how much worth you have, right? So there's this kind of connection between economic worth and spiritual worth. And I want us to think about whether there is some inklings of that in the United States' culture. Do we judge people based on their revenue to determine whether they're worth, something to just think about, right? I mean, what's the first question students ask on campus is, what's your major? And your major says more about you than just your narrow range of interests or what your job is going to be. It tells what your net worth is going to be, which also subtly in our culture tells what your worth is going to be, right? It's kind of an interesting kind of connection there. Number four, the idea of a limited atonement. Christ's atonement only reaches the elect, which is kind of an interesting idea. I think in D&C there it says that unless we repent, we'll have to suffer, even as God himself has suffered. Maybe that's D&C 19. I don't remember exactly what section it comes from, but there's something to that. Now, we wouldn't go this far and suggest that he only atoned for those that are the elect, right? But I don't know. There's something there that we can maybe think about. There might be some element there that we can maybe agree with, and not that we have to. It's just there's some interesting similarities there. But certainly that Christ's atonement only reaches some. We would definitely disagree with that. Irresistible grace. Individuals cannot reject grace, but will be drawn to it. And so those that are elect, again, how do you know, right? Individuals that are elect will just be naturally drawn to it. And then the perseverance of saints, that once saved, you will always be saved, which is kind of an interesting idea, that that someone could be elected to be saved, and then that's it, right? You're good. Once you're saved, you're good, which is something that I think we would have tension with as well in the church, that we have to continually work towards our progression. But I think that the idea of working towards progression kind of contradicts, at least in their theology, contradicts this idea of unconditional election. No amount of good work can save someone. So once you're saved, that's pretty much it. I mean, not it, but that's all you have to really do or worry about. And then there's this. This is kind of some other subtle elements to the doctrine, right? The doctrine of vocation, that honest work is a calling from God, meaning that if you are a good worker, you are more godly. And the harder the worker you are, the more godly you are. And I wonder if there are some elements of this, residual elements of this within the United States culture, right? And maybe even in the church, the LDS culture, the idea of honest work is a calling from God, and we need to be constantly working, constantly busy, right? The doctrine of stewardship, we need to have wise resources, but be wise with our resources that God has given us. The doctrine of sanctification, that we need to progress within our holiness, which is kind of interesting because that seems to kind of contradict the earlier one that we talked about not needing to do that. But he suggests that there should be, I guess, some progress within that. But then this idea of temperance, moral rigor, discipline, sobriety, strict adherence to Christian principles, and so constantly being on guard with yourself, right? It's the idea of trying to put these parameters around yourself, these kind of metaphoric fences to control, to constantly control yourself. Now, we're going to see this within art, right? We're going to see these ideas. We're going to see the idea of honest work is a calling from God, right? So the idea that if you're going about your day and you're working really hard, that means you are doing something spiritual. So the idea that work is kind of a quasi-spiritual thing, we're going to see that being represented, right? The people that are paying for art want to demonstrate their virtue, and so they're going to ask the artist to do that, right? The idea of being wise stewards with resources, the idea of wastefulness is also going to be demonstrated within Dutch art. And then the idea of having moral rigor, discipline, sobriety, all going to be part of Dutch art. And we're going to see these ideas. And here's where we see Gerard Honthorst, right? With the rise of the Dutch East India Company that we've talked about before, the Netherlands was transformed from a backwoods podunk area to a vibrant metropolis and economic center of the world, right? And with this comes art, with this comes education. Leiden in Holland was the first university in Holland. We see the growth of science, we see the growth of knowledge, excitement, and the arts, right? Gerard Honthorst was a Dutch painter, and he was known for his mastery of light and his contributions to what is known as the Utrecht Caravaggioist movement. And Caravaggioist movement just means that those that are inspired by Caravaggio and bring his ideas back to Holland, right? He was born in Utrecht in the Netherlands and received his early artistic training from his father, who was mainly a decorative painter. At a young age, Honthorst traveled to Italy to study art, where he became influenced by the works of none other than Caravaggio, right? He adopted Caravaggio's style with his use of chiaroscuro, or also known as tenebrism, that idea of that dramatic lighting, which becomes hallmarks of his own style. During this time in Italy, Honthorst came into contact with other Dutch artists who were exploring Caravaggio's techniques, and they formed a network of like-minded artists, right? After returning to Utrecht, he then becomes the leading figure within this. And his subjects range from kind of all over the place, but a lot of mythology, a lot of kind of common everyday themes. But we're not going to see Mary, Mother of Jesus. We're not going to see saints and things of that nature. This one is a secular painting, but very similar to what we see in other Northern Renaissance works of art in the post-Protestant movement. It's going to have a moralizing theme to it. And so this one has a moralizing theme to it. So we see the dramatic lighting with a candle at the very center, and it's very strategically located on the pretty young girl, right? And then also kind of the lute that she has there, right? The man in his left hand clutches a purse with coins, and then there is an older lady to the far left-hand side who's kind of pointing, smiling at the young lady, right? This is known as the painting is entitled The Procuress, right? The Procuress is someone, generally an older madam or older lady, who leads young men to younger women to set up a romantic exchange, right? And so we have a different term for that in our day and age, but you get that, you get the idea, right? So the money that he holds in his hand, the young lady, right, kind of smiling in the light, holding the lute. This is about this is about temperance, right? This is about the idea that we need to control ourselves. But we see the ideas of Caravaggio not only in terms of technique, right? The foreshortened background, the dramatic lighting, kind of the movement of the hands, and to direct, right? Kind of that dramatic element to it. But we also see the power of women, right? That's going to be a major theme. We saw that with Caravaggio and Judith and Holofernes. We saw it again with his work of the beheading of John the Baptist, and we saw a little bit with Rubens and his representation of Adam and Eve, where Eve is kind of naturally drawn towards the tree of knowledge, or I guess of sin, and then Adam's kind of trying to stop her, but there's no stopping her. The idea that women have this kind of alluring power, and if you're not on guard, they're going to, I guess, lure you to your demise. And then it's kind of interesting that she has this musical instrument here, which in the north, right, in Holland at the time, music was associated with wine and dance and frivolous natures. And so generally it was considered, because it wasn't industrious and hardworking and, it was considered to be associated with sin, right? So the idea of folly. And so you have a woman there, you have the music there. This is a person that is falling into folly, the idea of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, which would be frowned upon in the region of Holland, right? So that idea of this is, even though there's no kind of overt religious iconography within this, this is kind of a morality lesson on what not to do, right? We need to constantly guard ourselves. And so we can see kind of that transmission of ideas between what's happening in Italy with Caravaggio and what's happening in Holland with Honthorst, right? And Honthorst becomes one of the leading Caravaggists, bringing these ideas back with him. And we see that indication of that power of women. It's a little bit different, though, with Caravaggio's Judith and Holofernes. I mean, she's still that kind of idea of heroism, innocence, right? As she kind of recoils from lopping off the head, this is not something that she enjoys. And so it's not as though Caravaggio is necessarily saying that women are all evil, but they have a certain power. And the only power that they have within the confines of this particular world is being able to, entice men. And so Judith uses that power to be able to gain an advantage or leverage over Holofernes. We see a similar idea to that, but it's much more heavy-handed within the North, right? That women are not just, innocent or heroic or doing this for the people. This is just women that are, I guess, this is what they want. It's just kind of an interesting message that that women lead to this idea of destruction. Let's take a look at another individual that was influenced by Caravaggio, Frans Hals, in this area. A very well-renowned Dutch painter during this golden age. He was born in Antwerp when it was the Spanish Netherlands. Again, that kind of tensions on the background that we've talked about before. Spends most of his life in Haarlem, which is just outside, just a suburb of Amsterdam. And mainly he's known for his portraits, which kind of range in variety, right? So here we see a very wealthy merchant's daughter, right, Katharina Hoof, with her nurse. It's kind of interesting as he represents this young lady, and the elaborate dress that she has on, very expensive, with the lace, and then this kind of gem here, which I assume would be a ruby. And then kind of touching her nurse, which she's not even painted with her mother. Her mother has, busy doing other things apparently. So this wealthy family has the means to be able to afford a nurse. But it's kind of interesting that that she places this fruit here, which is this kind of memento mori, right? This kind of reminder of death, right? It's a reminder of sin. It's a reminder of folly. It's a reminder of the, kind of a subtle hint towards the forbidden fruit. And so the idea is that we need to be cautious at all times. We need to constantly be at guard, because human nature is so corrupt. Human nature is drawn towards these vices, and so we constantly need to be corrupt. Now, it's a little bit interesting. I haven't really figured out how that works, because the people who are elect are just kind of, naturally given that ability by God. And so they're not going to be naturally driven towards sin and folly, whatnot. So then the question is, why are they so concerned about falling into folly? I don't really, not being a Calvinist, I don't really know how they reconcile. I'm sure they have their own ideas on that. But this is a constant theme within Dutch art. This is another one just kind of showing you the range of his works. This is the Gypsy Girl, so painting the kind of the elite at the time, but then also painting just the common average person. So very similar to what we see with other Baroque artists, that it's not necessarily just about the subject matter, an important subject matter, painting Marie Medici or something, and a kind of important queen or king or something of that nature, or painting some, mythology scene. It could be about anything, right? And it's about what the artist is able to capture, the insights of the artist. And so here we see kind of this intimate portrayal of the gypsy girl. But again, it's kind of has this moralizing theme, kind of brings me back to Hawthorne's Procurus, right? The idea of having to be cautious, otherwise you can be lured into this. And then this one's kind of interesting. We've talked about René Descartes as a major voice of the 17th century, who articulates, I think, therefore I am, questioning the idea of how do we know we really exist? What do we really know? We need to doubt all things, and to a point where we can't doubt anything, and then we can build a foundation of knowledge on that. And so he becomes this leading philosopher, and so it shows the importance of education and art and culture that's happening in this kind of excitement of the time. I like this particular image. This one's kind of interesting. This one is the merry drinker, and this individual here is just kind of back up against a wall, just kind of offering people a drink, which is very similar to what we see with Caravaggio's Bacchus, right? Bacchus we've talked about before, who is the god of wine, kind of offering the viewer, right, into say whether you're going to partake within this. Surrounded by fruit, this kind of memento mori, right? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But again, the question that he's posing, the question that he's asking is, are we going to partake in this, or are we going to not, right? What we see is he's kind of influenced by that same idea. Now, this isn't a Bacchus, or this isn't, a god or anything like this. It's just an average kind of person, but he's inviting us into the revelry. He's inviting us into whether we're going to partake in the partying. All right, are we going to be temperate? Are we going to kind of control ourselves? Or are we going to give in to sin and temptation? And the question that they're posing is to the viewer, right? So it's a way to kind of for us to think about where we are and what we're going to do in terms of our own kind of actions, right? So just a way to think about this, and the foreshortened background is a way to invite us in. Judith Leister was a major artist during this age as well. She's one of the few majorly recognized female artists from the Dutch Golden Age. She was born in Haarlem as well, and she showed a talent for art at an early age, and she was heavily influenced by her contemporary Frans Hals, and so you can see that kind of influence here. Frans Hals, particularly in terms of brushstroke, we see that kind of looser brushstroke with Frans Hals' works, right? We can notice the brushstroke around the face and the forehead, right? It kind of becomes looser around the hands, and so much more expressive, right? She kind of continues that on. Her works, Judith Leister's works, are characterized by their skill and engaging subjects. And this is one of the most profound works that I really like with Judith Leister. We see the natural lighting with a candle that's there at the very kind of far left-hand side. And the woman that's busily engaged within her work, her needlework, kind of doing the work of women at the time. And this man kind of subtly looks over her shoulder, kind of touches her shoulder, and kind of trying to pull her towards him. And then in his hand is some gold coins, right? So it's kind of interesting to see the different juxtaposition. A similar kind of theme that we see with Honthorst and the Procuress, right? The idea of a man and woman, a young woman interacting, and then the idea that the man has money to offer, and then the woman has youth and beauty to offer, but they're represented very differently. With Leister, we see a female perspective of this, right? In Honthorst's representation, we see it's the woman that's inviting, right? Kind of luring the man in. In this one, the woman is busily engaged doing her own thing, and it's the man trying to turn her shoulder towards him and offer her whether she's going to exchange. And so this one is kind of more for the male viewer, right? What is the male viewer going to do? I guess to some extent it could be for the female viewer, or the women kind of seeing this. Are they going to kind of fall into this kind of, trap of luring men to their doom? This one's kind of more for the, I guess it could be for either one, but more focused, where this one's more focused on the male viewer, this one's more focused on the female viewer, right? Are you going to give in to the temptation? Are you going to give in to the offer, right? So it's kind of an interesting representation, a different theme that's happening, right? Power of women being perhaps destructive. Here, women are just kind of busily going about their day and they're being interrupted, right? So a different kind of way of seeing the world. And I think that it's important, even though there's a lot less women represented in museums, we need more of this kind of voice to see this kind of contrast of how people see the world differently, right? And we need to be able to have that, right? And then this is just me standing next to the work, right? It's not very big. It's about a size of about an 8x10 sheet of paper, pretty small. But this one is in The Hague, in the Muritz House, where we'll talk about another major work that's in the same place. But anyway, super cool. It's just about an hour south of Amsterdam, worth going to. Anyway, I wanted to. The next lecture is going to take a look at the next major artist, but I think Rembrandt deserves kind of a lecture unto himself. But this just shows you the early generation, the first generation of people coming into Holland, establishing the art scene there, influenced by Caravaggio style, bringing these ideas northward, and some of the major, how they take Caravaggio style and they apply it to this kind of Calvinist context. And so I think it's important to see how each region, uses the style and influence of the day, but also influenced by the thoughts and ideas that surround them as they envision the world through their art.